Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar being presented by the OU Business School. We've got three great speakers lined up for you and the opportunity for you to ask questions as well, which I'd like you to do in the chat, please. Global issues abound, and one of the big ones is transport in cities. And this is our opportunity to talk about transport in cities from a global perspective. We've got Mr. Paul Isaac Musasizi, who's going to be kicking off the webinar. Paul is the CEO of Kiira Motors Corporation. I'll say a little bit more about him in a moment. He'll be followed by Brian Matthews from Milton Keynes Council, and we'll finally have Dr Charles Mbalyohere, my colleague from the Department of Strategy and Marketing, to round things off. Each of our speakers will have 15 minutes to make their presentations, and we hope we'll have some time for questions at the end. So I'd like to begin with just a few notes on housekeeping. This event is being recorded. As I said before, please, if you have questions as we go along, put them into the chat box, and it would be helpful if you made it clear who your question is aimed at, if that's relevant. Also, if you see a question that you think is something you would like to have asked yourself, it's worth giving it a like, because that will help us to choose the most popular questions to put to the panelists at the end of the presentation. As I mentioned, this event is presented by the Open University Business School. We have a number of webinars that we present through the year. And if you'd like to follow us on social media for more details of those and any other of our activities, you can do so at our Twitter account at OUBS School, or in terms of Faculty of Business and Law at OU_FBL. Details of those are on the slides. Following the event, we'll be sending out a recording of the event to all of our attendees. So just moving to introduce our first speaker, Paul Isaac Musasizi. Paul has made the transition from being a successful academic to being a successful CEO of a national motor manufacturer, on which I must offer him my congratulations. He is the CEO of a company, Kiira Motors, set up to really to sort of put Uganda motor manufacturing on the map, particularly through the use of new technology in the shape of electric vehicles. The company is jointly owned by Makerere University and the government of Uganda, and they've produced some remarkable cars. Well, I should just hand over to Paul to give you the story of that progress. So thank you very much.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm going to be speaking today about e-mobility in Kampala City in Uganda. And as I've already been introduced, my name is Paul Isaac Musasizi. I would like to say a few things first about Kampala City. Kampala City is the capital city and central business district of the Republic of Uganda, with the Greater Kampala metropolitan area sitting on a space of over 970 square kilometers, covering a radius of about 12 kilometers outside the central business district. The city has a daytime population of about 4 million people, with 1.5 being residents and 2.5 commuting from the nearby municipalities and cities as well. This population is expected to grow to over 10 million residents by 2040. Currently, in the context of mobility, we have a multimodal transport system servicing the city, with 39.3% of the population using non-motorized transport, 41% using public transport, 10.1% using two-wheelers, which we call border borders, and 7.9% using private cars. Clearly, we see that there is a great deal of a need to service the city with a relevant mobility system. And with the population projected to grow to 10 million by 2040, the need even becomes bigger. So I would like to share with you some of the key problems of Kampala City from a mobility perspective. The studies that have been done by several scholars looking at the over a decade-long challenge of mobility in the Greater Kampala metropolitan area has isolated three core sub-problems of the mobility challenge in the Greater Kampala metropolitan area. One is road and traffic congestion, where we observe that the average traffic speed in Kampala on a day is 0 to 15 kilometers per hour in the central business district and most of the major arteries. We also have a problem of high carbon-based transport emissions. Studies which were done have in 2014 indicated that we have over half a kilogram per kilometer of hazardous high carbon based transport emissions within Kampala, which is perhaps not surprising that if you were on a street of Kampala walking, you would easily be clearing your throats almost all the time. These issues are further compounded by low fuel economy. And as we see, the numbers that we have seen show us that the city continues to experience way higher than 13.9 liters per 100 kilometers, as opposed to the would-be recommended 7.2 liters per 100 kilometers for passenger and light-duty trucks. Climate change is also posing a very serious challenge. In the past couple of years, we have experienced strange temperatures, as well as floods and heavy rains and mudslides across the country. The temperatures have increased by over 1.5 degrees, and studies have projected that this trend may result into an increase of 3 degrees by 2050. The recommended target for the Paris Agreement is less than 1.5 degrees centigrade. The city also, from a mobility perspective, experiences a challenge instead from inadequate transport infrastructure, with the city authorities and government always having a shortfall and inadequate investment in transport infrastructure, as well as having an ineffective transport management regime in place. It's liberalized. If you have a motorcycle, you can start your business. If you have a car, you can do Uber with minimal structure and regulations in place today. Lastly, but not least, we are also encumbered with unsafe modes of transport. The 3- and 2-wheelers, the border borders, have been notorious for being the biggest cause of accidents, accounting for 41% of the road traffic accidents in Uganda. The numbers of the count are in excess of 10,000 annually. Mulago Hospital, which is the national referral hospital, reports 5 to 20 accidents daily off border borders. And of course, we have also had several incidences resulting from some of these transport modes in terms of security threats as well as crimes. I want to share these frames with you so that you can walk with me a bit through Kampala, as you see, that being the central business district. And you see how the roads are quite busy with fairly old vehicles, which are typically 16 years at the time of registration in Uganda, contributing greatly to pollution and making Kampala the second most polluted city in Africa after Bamunda. Our approach to exploring a solution for the mobility requirement in Uganda is premised on a two-dimensional approach. On one side, seeing how we can explore a sustainable, scalable, and inclusive public transport system. And on the other side, also integrating domestic capacity for the manufacture of vehicles and vehicle components. What you see is the first electric bus built in Africa and in Uganda by Kiira Motors Corporation, known as the Kayola EVS. And currently, we are constructing a plant, the Kiira vehicle plant, where more of these vehicles will actually be manufactured to meet the need. We have perceived the e-mobility side of the city system to be premised on 6 system quality attributes. We see that mobility, or we envisage, we prospect mobility that is predictable. We also explore sustainability in the solution that we seek, leveraging local capacity and technology transfer to develop capabilities for manufacturing of the vehicles and the parts that will ultimately go into this mobility solution, to go a long way in leveraging our mineral resources and providing the much needed employment opportunities for our citizenry. We are also keen on the issue of safety and security, as we have earlier highlighted that this is a key problem. We would like our transport system to be secure and also to be safe with the necessary safety ingredients in place. Also providing accessibility options for people with disabilities. Those ones who have visual impairments should be able to have other options for utilizing this system. And those ones who have hearing problems should also have the appropriate aids to handle and participate meaningfully within the mobility ecosystem. We are also keen on the environmental footprint of the solution, thinking carefully about how we can solve the issues of noise pollution, how we can improve air quality, but how we can also generally reduce the hazardous transport-based carbon emissions. And of course, economic efficiency is important. And here we see the need for us to have some regulation, a certain level of standardization of the service and the system, as well as innovation along ensuring that we have the right systems to support, for example, cashless transactions, amongst others. We have proposed a system which we are working toward, which integrates the 6 core aspects that we believe would form the basis of a good and meaningful e-bus mass transit solution for Kampala. Here we see the e-bus, we see the charger, the bus stops where people board on and board off, the e-bus charging and service and priority right of access, training of drivers and operators, as well as payment management systems and the IT infrastructure that would bring this together and enable the solution to work as expected. When we look at the bus, we have designed with the help of technology transfer partners in China, we've designed and developed the Kayola EVS bus with a number of contemporary features, which we believe in production will go a long way in elevating the quality of service of the bus transit systems based on green technology. On top of inclusive design, we have emphasized safety, comfort, connectivity at all times, internal and external display boards to support a couple of messages, CCTV cameras for passenger count and also for security, and of course, in light of the current wave of the pandemic, capabilities for automated sanitizer dispensers, temperature monitors, sanitation bins, but importantly also to observe that this is foundationed on supply chain localization for a wide range of parts and also developing the parts here for optimizing the economic output. We at Kiira Motors Corporation are working with Tondeka Metro Company, Rentco Africa, and other partners to put in place a comprehensive bus transit system for Kampala, initially deploying 50 electric buses on top of a fleet of diesel buses. And ultimately, we believe that by 2030, the entire fleet should be fully electric. In this system, we see the need for proper management of the infrastructure that enables us to support all routes, including terminals, depots, roadside infrastructure, as well as the electric bus charging infrastructure, the frontline operations for real-time depot location, as well as the driver management, training, dealing with customer complaints and incident management, management of the fleet, schedules and network development, where are we deploying what, and how are we managing our operations, crew scheduling, amongst others, service delivery and roadside management, the predictability we talked about earlier, to ensure that we have a well-designed timetable which we can implement, as well as scheduling the crew and routing them to perform what is expected, and of course integrating an intelligent transport system that can work and is fit for purpose and is totally integrated with less need for managing cash, especially cashless, on the buses themselves. I do believe that with this outlook, we have an opportunity to go a long way in addressing the mobility challenges that are dogging our country and especially our city for over a decade. I thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. That was a terrific presentation. We'll probably have some questions for you at the end of the of Charles's presentation. And what I'd like to do now is to move on to welcome Brian Matthews to talk about the kinds of urban transport problems and solutions that Milton Keynes has. If I can just say a few words in introduction, Brian has been at Milton Keynes Council, I calculate now, for 24 years, I think, but and in that time, he's overseen the role of transport in creating Milton Keynes as a smart city, which is a fantastic concept. I mean, Milton Keynes is such an interesting place to live. And a recent part of that, a recent very important part of that process has been establishing the first fully inductive charging bus system in the UK. So Do try that out if you haven't done so already. It's very ingenious. It uses the same kind of technology as your toothbrush at either end of its journey. And at the moment, Brian has moved his energies towards the possibilities of using the 5G network, and in the spirit of a smart city, to empower citizens with data so that they can make more effective choices in terms of mobility, energy use, and also access to healthcare. So, Brian, can I invite you to take over, please?
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. And just to add flavour to that is that many of the projects I've worked with has been in collaboration with the Open University, particularly around the topics I'm going to be talking about this afternoon, around electric mobility in Milton Keynes. So thank you for Paul for his very, very informative presentation, and I will be contacting you, Paul, if you don't mind, because we are developing a new initiative in Milton Keynes to move to an all-electric bus fleet, and we're currently developing the business case to work with government to do that. So I think there's some lessons we can learn from yourself, and maybe we can have a good conversation on that. It's a great pleasure for me to speak to you this afternoon. As introduced, I'm Brian Matthews. I'm Head of Transport Innovation at Milton Keynes Council. I work for the City Authority, and my role really is to explore how we can develop as a smart city, particularly around the mobility piece. And I'll introduce some of the wider areas we're looking at as a city, but I'll really focus in on a theme for today around the electric mobility and our ambitions to move to an all-electric mobility city in the very near future. So perhaps we can move on to the next slide. For those who may not know where Milton Keynes is, and apologies that the red circle on the map is not quite in the right place, but we are a new city. 50 years ago, Milton Keynes didn't exist. We were part of a planned growth in the UK of a series of new cities to support growth of the UK post-war. And Milton Keynes, I think, has benefited from its location in the UK of being approximately midway between London and Birmingham, Oxford and Cambridge. So an ideal location to develop a city. And it's on basis on that location, I believe, that Milton Keynes has developed into one of the fastest growing cities in the United Kingdom. We currently have a population approaching 300,000. But ambitious plans of the next 20 to 30 years to perhaps go to a city with a size of 500,000. And for the context, that will make us the largest city in the southeast of England outside of London. But undoubtedly that growth will present the city and its planners challenges, particularly around mobility and how we sustain people's ability to transport themselves around Milton Keynes to and from in a sustainable way in the future. A little bit of background, Milton Keynes' design was very much predicated on supporting the private car. We enjoy many fast, high-speed, high-quality roads based on a US-style grid network, plenty of car parking. But over time, we've realised we cannot go on in that way, and we need to develop new solutions to how we develop sustainably. And one of my first tasks in the relatively new role I've taken on at the council as Head of Transport Innovation is to start mapping where we think the future of mobility will manifest itself across the UK, in particular Milton Keynes, and looking at timelines and start to explore which of those in the diagram at the bottom, those new exciting transport options, will be a good fit for Milton Keynes. How we will support the sustainable accessibility that we strive for to ensure the city continues its development and economic growth. And really my job is to unravel the intertwined modes of transport on the diagram at the top and to see what works best for the city. Now, clearly, this is a timeline and things will develop quicker than other areas. And electric vehicles is clearly a technology that's emerged over the past 10 years. It's here and now. And so a focus that I've had is really exploring how we develop electric vehicle, electric mobility for Milton Keynes. So next slide, please. Really, our starting point on the journey to electrification of the transport networks started around 5 years ago when we developed our Go Ultra Low City scheme. This was in recognition to government's desire for cities to be at the vanguard of taking forward electric mobility. And we were very lucky and successful in attracting funding to help us develop our programme and really be at the vanguard of the development for not just Milton Keynes, but for the UK. Now, many of you will be aware of some of the challenges with electric vehicles, and they're no different in Milton Keynes. It's about range anxiety. It's about the level of infrastructure to support the switch to electric vehicles. And a big component is around cost. So within our strategy, we developed a range of measures, 18 in total, around how we would address this problem. So in terms of infrastructure and vehicle capabilities, these are really looking at the range anxiety. We were asking people to take on vehicles at the time that probably had a range of less than 100 miles per charge and with a very fragile infrastructure network. So how do we work with customers, potential new customers, to ensure that the range anxiety went away? So it's around understanding where the infrastructure needs to be, what form it takes, how it's accessed, and linking that to vehicle capabilities. At the time we started our programme, there was probably less than 10 models available. Now there's many more, so we had to work within the capabilities of the vehicles that we had to offer to people. Clearly, costs is an issue. Electric vehicles as new technology tended to be higher costs. So how do we address that? How do we support the decision making by giving better information around the whole life cost of vehicles compared to the way people have travelled around currently in typically diesel or petrol vehicles? And a big area of our emphasis was around information. I think we recognised very early on that there was a lot of myths, misinformation, not deliberate or purposeful in that way, but it was really sifting out what the real facts were, breaking down some of the barriers from an inconsistent set of messages coming both from industry, from public, from commentators. And we also recognise that this is a new technology when we started. It's very rapidly moving, as we all recognise technology does now. And so we needed to keep an eye on what the future solutions, how we would address the growth of electric vehicles in emerging markets. And really, one of the key things that we learned in this, and the title of the slide is, we required strong leadership to see this through. We were doing new things that may not have been understood. So having that leadership in place was essential for us to take that forward. And we can see there a minister from the UK opening our free parking scheme as a way to address the cost issue. The mayor of Milton Keynes plugging his mayoral caring. So next slide, please. So what I'd like to do now is, over the next couple of slides, is really drill down into 3 of the 18 areas that we felt has been important in developing what we've done in Milton Keynes. The first was to address the information, give consumers free, impartial, independent advice we felt was important. And to do that, we created a facility in central Milton Keynes, which we believe was the first in Europe, if not the world, to offer what essentially looks like a dealership, but we don't sell vehicles, to really interact with customers and start talking to them around the use of electric vehicles, what their requirements were, and how we could match that consumer to a vehicle or to a change in their mobility. And that was a two-way conversation, which was very useful for us, as I'll go on to in the next slide in a moment, is that we got a better picture of what the barriers really were for consumers and what was preventing them moving to electric vehicles. And through that, we were able to deliver our strategy to deliver the growth in vehicles we were requiring, and also help us invest in the right areas. And also it was very important to make a point that we work very much with industrial partners, collaborators in this area, to ensure that we had a two-way conversation with the businesses that were really going to deliver both the infrastructure and the vehicles. So next slide, please. So when we talk about infrastructure, that one of the key barriers, using the information we gain from the EV Centre and intelligence we were building up from consumers, we developed a strategy that around charging for public use. Now, one of this would be easy if we could provide a charger at everybody's home where they park the car overnight. It would be straightforward to remove range anxiety and get the charging to the vehicles. But I think we all recognise that's unrealistic. And especially in the early days, on-street home charging was very difficult to provide because there was public resistance to charging because there wasn't sufficient vehicles around. It was seen as a waste of space and resource and preventing other people to park their existing vehicles. So very challenging for us. So we really, our strategy was to turn the problem around. Where else were cars congregating that they could take a meaningful charge to support their use? And one of the areas that we tapped into very early on was the workplace. Many of us park our car at the place of work and leave it there all day. And so we had some very great success in putting workplace chargers in car parks. And that supported many people in charging their vehicles, especially those who couldn't, as I say, charge at home. It also added the benefit of opening the door to talk to fleet managers, to start looking at the cost equation of how fleets operate in the future. So from just providing chargers early on in our programme, we're now providing advice and guidance, and we're seeing a shift towards fleet use of electric vehicles. The other area which we looked at is public or destination parking areas, where people go shopping or go to the theatre, cinema, where they generally spend a couple of hours. And if we can put a reasonably high quality chargers in those areas, again, that addressed the charging challenge. And it also meant that people weren't really going out of the way or being inconvenienced to take on the charge. Then the third area that we looked at is clearly some people do like to have the charging near their home. So where we had land available, we developed a network of charging hubs where you had typically several charging solutions in one location near to communities. So we tried to put these facilities within a kilometre of every home in Milton Keynes. So throughout that process, we have, we think, developed a really viable, suitable network for Milton Keynes and the city. And we now have some 400 charge posts across the city. And very importantly, the line at the bottom is that we supported this with appropriate business and operational models. Sometimes a failing in cities is to get that right. So having the economics right, having the right maintenance regimes and charging regimes is essential really to keep these networks moving forward. So next slide, please. The other area is about the future and how we see electric vehicles growing beyond the current state. And one of the challenges we're starting to face now is around equality. Some commentators and some kickback we get for electric mobility is that we are tending to subsidise people who tend to be slightly better off and can afford these vehicles. So why should we be giving them priority access to parking, free parking? And what about the people who may have disabilities that doesn't allow them to use an electric vehicle, hauling a cable around to plug in vehicles? So one of the exciting experiments or trials that we have underway is around wireless charging. So similar to how Terry described the bus, we're using this technology on private vehicles. And this will, I think, open up the market, not just for those who don't or who can't plug vehicles in, but it's really driving, working with business partners to look at car share models. If you have this ability to have very easy charging that the customer doesn't have to worry about wirelessly, can these support more innovative uses of electric vehicles through car share? And the third area that we're looking at in terms of the future solutions is around sustainability. We are enjoying a significant growth in electric vehicles in Milton Keynes, and that can be accommodated reasonably easily at the moment. But how are we going to manage energy in the future and make it affordable to use? So an area we're looking at is really integrating the car as an energy source into the home, using solar power, battery storage, vehicle-to-grid technology to create an ecosystem that's scalable from a few trial homes we've got underway in Milton Keynes to perhaps being mainstream in the future. Not only do you buy your electric vehicle or lease your electric vehicle, it comes perhaps with a package that supports energy at home management. And so we're developing ideas and thinking around new models of how electric vehicles will be taken forward into the future. And so on to my final slide, please. As I say, it's been a real pleasure talking this afternoon. Just to report on our scheme, we set our targets back in 2015 to have new car sales up to around 20% by the end of the programme, which is this year. And I'm pleased to report that we are seeing, although it fluctuates a little, sales now going between 15 and 23% of new car sales. So I think the programme we have developed is starting to show fruits. But I say the challenge ahead is around equity, energy management, and working with our citizens. Thank you. I'm sorry if I've gone over a little.
No, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian. I'm sure I can see there's quite a few questions in the chat for you and for Paul, so we'll get to them, I hope, at the end. But now can I introduce our final speaker, my colleague from the Department of Strategy and Marketing, Dr Charles Mbalyohere. Charles is he's an academic who's all about impact. He really is. He reaches out to lots of external partners such as Milton Keynes Council. He's made some great links between the Open University and our outstanding colleagues in Makerere University, and he also masterminded and produced an amazing event in November 2019, the final celebratory event for our 50th anniversary as the Open University, which was the Open Impact Conference in Kampala in Uganda itself. So I can tell you, I have first-hand experience of traveling in Kampala, and boy, could I have done with one of those amazing Kayula buses that Paul was talking about. Anyway, Charles, please, can I hand over to you for our final presentation? Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed, Terry, for that, and very nice words you've used there to explain your experience in Kampala. I'm sure Paul has listened very carefully to that. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much indeed for this opportunity to make this final presentation. I will be talking about a slightly different angle, a slightly different take to what the first two presenters have presented to you, but very connected, very interlinked with this. And so let us go straight to that first slide, please. So the issue is that Sub-Saharan Africa has a problem with access to electricity. And currently, the average rate of access is around 48%, according to the World Bank and the International Energy Agency. The situation is even worse in rural areas where access is about 19%. Compared to rural area to urban areas, which is about 29%. And in real terms, this translates to around 600 million people currently having no access to electricity on the continent. That is a huge number. And this lack of access is causing all types of issues. Is, in my estimation, the most important hindrance to development on the continent currently. On this slide, you see a few, you see a graph and a chart that describes the situation. So on the left, you have that graph showing access in the last 2 decades according to regions. West Africa has done relatively better than the rest of the regions. East Africa has been improving, coming from a very low point. Central Africa has relatively stagnated, so the progress has been rather low, mainly influenced by the issues that have been experienced in the DRC, as you know, political instability. On the right, you see some examples of countries and how they've been performing. On the left of that chart, you see percentage access. And on the right, you have absolute numbers in terms of millions of people that are accessing electricity currently in the last 2 decades or so. So the situation is not so great as we approach the expiry of the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. And so how does this relate to electric vehicles? We are experiencing a transition to electric vehicles currently globally. And there is an opportunity in this for Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, to improve its experience with access to electricity. And I will give some examples how this we think can happen. So the first example, the first opportunity is the fact that in electric vehicles you have mainly lithium-ion batteries, and usually they have a lifetime of currently 8 to 12 years on average. So after that time, the lithium battery, the battery is no longer really optimal to use in electric vehicles. However, it still has usability elsewhere. So usually the capacity is between 70 and 80% at that time, not usable for optimal performance in electric vehicles, but still possible to be used elsewhere. And so increasingly, there's work that is being done to study how these batteries can be used for storage of energy. And the next possibility is integrating these storage systems into what we call renewable energy resource centers. So that is some work we've been doing at the Open University in understanding what these centers are, renewable energy resource centers. They are effectively organizational structures which link energy technology providers and end users. This is especially a problem in rural areas which have a very low access, as I pointed out on the first slide. So we've been doing some work to see how these centers can strengthen the linkage between providers and users, because many of these providers are based in urban areas and they have hardly any centers in rural areas. They just come, they just send their agents to work there during some seasons. And so these centers can be a very strong bridge. And so these centers can also act as a home for storage systems based on these batteries. And thirdly, these storage systems can facilitate the integration of various forms of renewable energy, especially hydro and solar power, which are the main forms of usage in Sub-Saharan Africa. And so we believe, and from the evidence that we are seeing, is that this is a way that can help with reducing the fragmentation of renewable energy use, to make it more synergetic, to fill the gaps, to coordinate things more. And finally, one way in which electric vehicles can be of help is that currently you have national grids which have problems with high outage rates, approximately 10% outage for most of Africa. There is a possibility of these national grids being supported through electric vehicles using smart charging technologies. For example, vehicle to grid. So that means that if you have some electric vehicles which usually stand, are parked for more than 90% of the time, you could use them to feed into the national grid. So vehicle to grid, but also you can use vehicle to households, whereby you don't necessarily feed into the grid, but you feed directly into households which may be suffering from the outages. And on the right, you have an example of a system of putting together these batteries for storage. You have the feed-in, in this case, using wind power, which is not so much on the African continent, but also in some countries it's used. Then these are transformed into a form that is usable. And then you also have access to data, which can be used in various ways. So you need to have an energy data management system. So hence the linkage to the cloud. And then, of course, you have the batteries, which are then sort of put together before you serve. For example, the buses that Paul was talking of earlier on can be fed into this system. Next slide, please. And so with that background, the issue now is how to manage this transition on the continent. Here we have some examples of what can be done. Possibly the most important challenge is policy, because many countries don't yet have a clear policy about transition to electric vehicles. So there's need to support the nascent sector. There's need for developing the political will and also to win more stakeholders into this. And also to remember that currently Sub-Saharan Africa is the place where most second-hand vehicles are used. So the region has a market share of 40% of second-hand vehicles. It is debatable whether this will continue being, being the same when we use more electric vehicles. It is possible that initially we shall have again electric vehicles being used in other countries like here in the UK or other more developed countries, and then being imported into Sub-Saharan Africa for secondary use. So, but also if you see pioneers like, Paul's company doing things, there's a possibility of the situation changing. So there's a need to rethink that model, whether it can work for the future. And thirdly, this is an opportunity to support innovation on the continent. And so we think we can have more innovative products, more services that are innovative, and business models that are more fit for the region, addressing some of the issues that the other presenters have talked about: affordability, convenience of access, sustainability, and also supporting developing synergies in other areas. And also finally, this is an opportunity to fine-tune mass mobility, which the first two presentations really prioritized. So to integrate that with access to electricity. So if you can link up the two, then effectively you have a leapfrog model on the continent, which can help to move forward. And there on the right, you have some examples of currently the various forms of commuting that are used in most African cities. So you have the two-wheelers there, and you have these usually 12 to 14 people seater vehicles that are used, but a lot of walking too, of course, that is used. Next slide, please. And so on this final slide, this is just to give us an idea of how the market is looking with electric vehicles globally. So currently we just have maybe a total of around 11 million electric vehicles globally, with a sales rate of roughly 3 million vehicles total per year currently. But this is now going to grow exponentially as we move into the next 2 decades, and you can see how things are going to dramatically change, even just 10 years from now. But if you look at 40 years, the situation will have changed dramatically, with 60 million vehicles sold per year. And in absolute terms, of course, in total vehicles, that is much higher than this. But you can see here that shaded, that gray area is more for new frontiers, like in Sub-Saharan Africa. That will even grow more. The exponential growth will continue more than elsewhere. And so the opportunities to do things here, based on what the other presenters have talked about and what I've also mentioned in this presentation. In conclusion, the 2 cases we have here, the one of Kampala under Milton Keynes suggests that there's opportunity for sharing experiences. There's the opportunity to establish synergies between various cities, because you cannot do things individually. If we want to make an impact on the global climate crisis we have now, we have to coordinate a bit more. We can fast track the transition to electric vehicles, and we can consolidate the circular economy, for example, using repurposing of those batteries. And so if we can make experiences, for example, in a city like Kampala, this can be useful globally. And finally, the fact that electric mobility and the second life battery usage, as mentioned, are effectively the next big thing in new frontiers. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Charles, for that extremely interesting perspective on the bigger picture, really. Let's move now to some questions. If I could ask the panelists to switch their microphones and their cameras back on. Paul's been, Brian's been hard at work actually already answering questions in the chat, but I don't know if everybody's seen some of the answers. So can I just ask Paul perhaps to repeat himself just about how the new MK service replacing of buses replacing older buses is getting on, please?
Thank you for that question.
I'm sorry, Paul. I said Paul there. I meant Brian. So I do apologise. I'll come on to you in a moment. Thank you very much, Brian. Sorry.
Yes, what I introduced is we do have a programme around looking at our bus services, and there's two streams to it. One is to look to how buses operate. So we've launched a demand responsive service in Milton Keynes, which is electric, using minivans. And this, we think, gives the consumer a better option for bus travel, in that they're in more control of how the buses run, where and when, because it's demand responsive. And with scheduling capabilities, we can schedule charging into the daily schedules. They're not on a fixed timetable. So that's one strand where we're looking at public transport. The other is to recognise there still is an important role for larger buses on regular routes. And we're working very hard with the bus company and technology companies to build the business case and economics around having a solution that's all electric. And we're working with national government. We've a very large bid in with government at the moment to secure funding to replace the entire bus fleet in Milton Keynes with a new electric fleet. We do rely on some subsidy to cover the additional cost that entails, but we're working very hard to do that. And even if we're not successful with a government grant, we have a plan B that might see a slower rollout, but we are confident we can get the economics to work, working with businesses to run an all-electric fleet. And that's an important signal, because we learned with the Route 7 that you introduced, simply by changing to electric, attracted more people, because people want to be associated with this new technology and be part of it.
Great. Thank you very much. Now moving to you, Paul. Sorry about my earlier confusion. I've got a question here from Ricardo Garcia Coyne. In fact, if you've got time, I've got two questions from Ricardo. The first one is, he asks, from your experience with Kampala, what key policies and regulations would you recommend developing countries to consider as a way to speed up transit electrification? So just looking at the kind of, what are the key policies and regulations that would help developing countries speed up this process, in your experience?
Certainly, issues around policy, infrastructure are going to be very critical to speeding up the electrification of mobility in developing countries. And some of the policy interventions we are thinking about is, one, how do we leverage the excess production of hydropower? For example, the case of Uganda, we have production today stands at about 1,200 megawatts. and there is a dam coming online in the next couple of months to touch 1,800 megawatts, and the peak consumption is just shy of 700 megawatts, meaning that we have that excess production which could actually be leveraged to improve our energy equation. So how are we looking at prioritizing mobility, since it's a core aspect of the economic transformation that we prospect through having preferential tariffs for electric vehicles, as well as providing some physical incentives around the entire ecosystem that supports electric vehicles, the infrastructure itself, the vehicle itself, as well as the R&D that will enable us to establish the ecosystem that works. These are some of the core policy options that we are thinking can greatly help. But also, on the other side, how do we disincentivize vehicles that do not meet required emission standards? I think that will go a long way in addressing the move towards electrification, while we also address air quality and environmental concerns of the city in Kampala, but also the wider Sub-Saharan Africa.
Great. That actually brings me on very nicely to Ricardo's second question, which was, what do your expansion plans look like beyond Kampala and Uganda?
Our vision is to be the beachhead of electrification in Sub-Saharan Africa, and we have first mover advantage. We have been the first to bring an electric vehicle to the road in Sub-Saharan Africa. And our hope is that as we ramp up into production and we prove our product in the production space, we will be able to attract clients, starting with the cities, not only in Kampala, but across Uganda, where now we have over 14 cities that have been established. Jinja is a prime city for electrification, considering its vision. But we also have Mbarara, which is a fast growing city. Then with the Albertine region, where there are cities like Kasese and Port Portal with the oil coming up, we see an opportunity in Uganda beyond Kampala. And I think that success stories here in Uganda will attract clientele and collaborations and partnerships across Sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, that's a very inspiring vision. Very best of luck with it. I think we've got time just for one more question. This is from Andrew Blackburn. It's originally addressed at Brian, but actually I'd be quite interested to see if Charles has got any thoughts about it, and perhaps if he hasn't, Brian could step in. Your first slide gave an illustrative timeline. If you remember back to Brian's first slide, it did indeed. What do you think the future landscape in terms of proportions of electric vehicles against alternative fuels may be? And one of Charles's slides actually gave hints about this too. Are EV vehicles a stopgap? If so, is investment short-term or short-sighted? So, Charles, what do you think about that? Do you think what is the future looking like in terms of uptake? Do you think that what kind of the question is the proportions of EV vehicles against alternative fuels? How's that looking? Because there are other fuels out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Right now, it is relatively low if you look at the whole mix. However, the rate of growth compared to the other fuels is looking very good. So like that graph I showed, if you look 10, 20 years ahead, it's looking very good. So certainly there are issues with investment, with the policy issues that, for example, Paul was talking about with incentivizing investment. But of course, there are challenges, but also some good things to hear. For example, I think we know that here in the UK, there's been there's an objective to phase out fossil fuel driven vehicles in 10 to 15 years from now, and many other countries are also following that, trying to pursue that target. That you need to have a target, and then when you do that, then of course the pressure is on the electricity industry, the electric vehicle industry, to push up its act. it's a bit challenging in developing countries because of the policy issues, because of investment. These things require a lot of investment, so there's a lot of issues there to push. So we're probably looking to a situation where developments in these countries depend on the progress that is made here in other countries. Because if you succeed in other countries, you're going to have the first edition of electric vehicles sort of needing to go somewhere. So what do you do with them? But going back to that core issue, it is still weak. The investment is low, but there are signs that it can be improved, and that's where we are right now.
It's a very exciting moment, I think, and it's been a great privilege to have the movers and shakers globally here with us this lunchtime. Brian looking at this in a slightly more mature, perhaps stage of its life cycle, early as it is in Milton Keynes. Paul really making some exciting innovations there in Kampala and with his eyes on the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa, and Charles with a sort of an academic analysis and overview of the whole process. So I think these things, I hope this is going to signal some kind of ongoing collaboration and cooperation. But for the time being, thank you all very much indeed for your contributions. It's been fascinating. It's been a great honour to be able to chair this. I'd like to say thank you very much to everybody who's participated as in the audience. Thanks for your questions. They're really great. This event is brought to you, as I mentioned, by the Open University Business School, and a recording will be sent to you and to everybody else who has registered after the event. So thank you very much again. And also can I thank Louise and her team who have organised this so beautifully. Thanks again. Bye.